So I'm calling this talk Dark, the Sight and Sound of Black Lives. And I'm going to just jump right into it. So every time I hear the word dark, my mind does a quick, unconscious, inevitably disappointing evaluation of how it is being used and whether there is ever a positive spin on the word. Since it is always used to describe me and people who look like me, I'm attentive to the negative connotations associated with it in other contexts, because I wonder if there is a correlation between these connotations and how the world relates to dark-skinned people. A few months ago, I started tracking the use of the word. Actually, it's been a while since I started. I started tracking the use of the word in what I was watching, hearing, and reading. I found it used daily in newspaper articles, social media posts, television shows, casual conversations, formal lectures and roundtables, and group texts. It is such a common word, one which always carries a meaning that lurks underneath murky, dirty, swirling waters. The meaning of dark in the English language is usually associated with a feeling of or state that is sinister, depressing, dangerous, evil, or despondent. Here are some examples from my recent casual survey. For example, last year in a Vanity Fair article about the actor Armie Hammer, the writer explains how, quote, Hammer found himself in a darker crisis, end of quote. Then later in that same article, we read that, quote, many men in the Hammer family have a dark side, end of quote. Since this is an article about the troubles that the actor has had with women, we are to understand that the dark side is a dreadful place and that the darker crisis is a debilitating condition. This is the explanation for his alleged bad behavior. A New York Magazine article about a corrupt union leader explained that, quote, the mood among the employees grew dark, end of quote. We get it immediately, as we do when Bachelor candidate Colton Underwood, who was the virgin hottie from the Bachelor franchise, revealed that he was indeed gay. On why he struggled with coming out, Underwood told a bewildered Robin Roberts of ABC that, quote, I got into a place that was dark and bad. Again, here, dark is equated with bad, and we understand that this description is supposed to settle our anxieties about why he went on a show where he made out with over 20 young women. And his justification here is that the situation was so bad, he could not see his way to the light. And that would have saved these women the aggravation, disappointment, and embarrassment. In Harry Styles' music video for Adore You, there is a preamble that begins, quote, he had lost his mind and without it, the world grew darker, end of quote. This connection of psychological trauma and darkness is well used and deeply dangerous. When friends post bereavements on Facebook, they typically include a line about how the world is darker without their loved ones. We immediately sympathize, understanding that a beloved light has been extinguished from their world. These momentous events of loss change everything for us if we communicate in English. We often go to the dark language. This all sounds mildly interesting, I know, but I've begun to think more and more about how these connotations of a surface word and concept have deeper implications in real, tangible ways. I'm arguing here that the association of darkness to bad things is also connected to its association with bad people. The term nyctophobia refers to a condition where people are afraid of darkness. The Oxford Dictionary describes it as an, quote, extreme or irrational fear of the night or of darkness. Indeed, Darren Wilson, the officer who murdered Mike Brown, testified that Mike Brown, quote, looked like a demon. That's how angry he looked, end of quote. In all these examples, there is no qualification for what the darkness looks like or feels like. It is a blanket statement with no shades, no nuance. It's never a little dark or very dark. Dark is just dark. And dark is always bad, except when it comes to chocolate and music. I will lay out my contention here that Black music is in particular, has the ability to intervene in two ways. First, it helps push back against this concept of darkness by offering us lyrics that frame the histories and stories of Black people. Second, Black music allows us to learn how to uncover and unravel layers, depths, how to lean in and to be careful about how we see, how we hear, how we feel, and how we evolve as a society as a result of the work we will do. So I'm going to focus most of my talk now on a case study, so you understand where I'm going with this concept of darkness, right? That dark is always bad, and we've, as a society globally, when we use the word dark, it has come to connote negativity, and I'm contending that notion, that idea, that connection has been adjusted and seen, and that lens is being used to look at dark-skinned people, which is why we have the systemic racisms that we still have. So I'm saying also that Black music is a way to train ourselves to both see the histories and the stories of Black people, and can train us to be more deliberate and careful when we behold darkness and when we behold dark people. So here's my case study. I've got a podcast called Cover Story with Stephanie Shonekan, where my guests talk with me about the song covers they love. One of my favorites thus far is Bridge Over Troubled Waters by Simon and Garfunkel in 1970, covered beautifully by Aretha Franklin in 1971. Aretha's version makes me think about the turbulent waters of the Atlantic that transported my mother's ancestors to the New World, that have buoyed the systems of slavery, colonialism, and imperialism, as well as racism. But Aretha's version also invites us to think about her own personal history as a Black woman. What does the symbol of troubled waters signify to those listening? Two quick stories about my daughters. A couple years ago, our younger daughter called us quite distraught and said that while she was driving around in Missouri, where she was going to school at the time, she found herself behind a truck with a small sticker on its back bumper. It read simply, "Unreconstructed Confederacy." Just two words. The reference to the Confederacy, or even to the Confederate flag, is not out of the ordinary in places like Missouri. Typically, it is framed as a symbol of pride for some people or a symbol of deep pain for others. This sticker, though, sends an even clearer message. The word unreconstructed, attached to Confederacy, intends to reverse Reconstruction, which reverses the Civil War, which leads to the vision that Black folks would and should still be enslaved. Just two words with deep intentional meaning made legible within the context and the history of the United States. The truck owner who owns that truck intends to send a clear message with that sticker, and it is received loud and clear by this young Black woman who happens to be my daughter. My other daughter went to England to do a master's. She was unable to open a bank account because the banks insisted that new accounts could only be opened online. This was during COVID. She kept trying to open an account and kept being rejected because the photo she kept trying to take and upload was not accepted by the system. Phone calls and appeals to the bank yielded no solution. quote, "Sorry, miss, the photo is too dark, try again," end of quote. After many attempts, she abandoned the project and had to use her US account for a year in England, getting charged fees while her white classmates opened their accounts on their first attempt and did not incur the charges of using a US debit card in England. These are examples, two examples, of how systemic racism endures in the collective psyche and in our technologies. Like my daughters, my position at the nexus of these identities as Black and as a woman means that I am susceptible to particular waves of oppression related to these historical moments of injustice. We are all susceptible to these waves as scholars, writers, artists, professionals, human beings, but we get to choose how we react. The album I'm going to use as my case study today is a representation of a few artists' work to react to these storms and these concepts of darkness. And here's a challenge. Even if the waves aren't coming for you personally, how aware are you that these waves are coming? And how can your work be reflective and responsive to these times we are living through? This is why I appreciate the fields of ethnomusicology and Africana studies. Both of these interdisciplinary fields encompassing the humanities, social sciences, art, law, among others, provide a sturdy foundation that nurtures scholarship and critical thinking, building context for and awareness of why we have arrived at this juncture in history. These fields help answer the most fundamental questions. Why did mainstream society turn away from Mike Brown, Trayvon Martin, Sandra Bland, Breonna Taylor, and so many others? What was it about the George Floyd murder that woke so many people up? Are they still up or have they fallen back asleep? Through what lens does a truck driver with this sticker view the world? Even in the midst of the terrible invasion of Russia in Ukraine, by Russia, why does Ukraine prevent Africans from fleeing to safety? Why does the media not cover this part of the story, or indeed other wars raging in places like Cameroon? Why did the percentage of married Black women drop from 62% in 1950 to 36% in 2000? These are just questions that arise as we think about our society. So my talk today comes from an ethnomusicological and Africana studies perspective, and it is inspired by versions of these questions that have occurred and reoccurred during every generation since slavery. Throughout the 1950s, African Americans contended with hundreds of atrocities, among them the killing of Emmett Till in 1955, the Alabama church bombing in 1958, and so many others. In 1959, jazz drummer Max Roach and lyricist Oscar Brown Jr. began to work on a collaborative project to respond to their own historical moment. They were also inspired to prepare for the celebration of the centennial of the Emancipation Proclamation, which would take place in 1963. But in 1960, Max Roach decided to release the project as a musical and artistic response to the ugliness of segregation and racism. We Insist, Max Roach's Freedom Now Suite, the album, was released by Candid Records in 1960. Other collaborators on the album include percussionist Babatunde Olatunji, saxophonists Coleman Hawkins and Walter Benton, trumpeter Booker Little, trombonist Julian Priester, and most importantly, Max Roach's then girlfriend, vocalist Abby Lincoln. According to jazz scholar Ingrid Monson, this album, quote, is perhaps the best known jazz work with explicitly political content, end of quote. Before and since then, Black artists around the world have used their platforms to create music that fights back against white supremacist systems of power and pathological narratives of oppression. Duke Ellington's Black Brown and Beige, Nina Simone's Mississippi Goddamn, Curtis Mayfield's People Get Ready, Fela Anikulapo Kuti's Zombie, and so many others. Artists like Hugh Masekela, Kendrick Lamar, Stevie Wonder, Bob Marley, so many of them, all these artists weaponized their music so that it functioned as tools that were much more than entertainment. However, I would like to posit that the We Insist album is a unique and critical album because it reflects two important aspects of Black life: liberation and love. These two subjects are the heart of every movement that Black people have embarked on, and yet they are not often paired in one text. Certainly not when that text emerges from a complicated genre like jazz. But We Insist offers a nuanced understanding of these two subjects. In terms of revolution and liberation, Black artists often zoom in on one part of the Black world, one region, or one subgroup of Black people at one time. Curtis Mayfield, for example, focused on the US of the 1970s. Fela Anikulapo Kuti focused on post-independent Nigeria. Hugh Masekela focused on South Africa. Thomas Mapuno on Zimbabwe. Kendrick Lamar and Janelle Monáe focus on 21st century youth in urban United States. Max Roach's We Insist album does all of this by covering time and space. It stretches back to slavery and reaches out from the US back to Africa and looms over the entire continent. With 5 tracks, Roach adopts a Pan-African vision of the Black world. In terms of love, Black artists who have infused messages of racial justice have mainly illuminated the love for and of Black people, the community, and even the creator. The love is usually familial or spiritual or communal. We Insist offers us a glimpse into the complexities of romantic Black love. We rarely get a chance to consider that, to acknowledge how important it is and always has been to the Black community. In addition, it is important to examine the tensions that exist between Black men and Black women, as well as the distinct burdens they carry in a society that encouraged and urged fractures in their relationship. In a fundamental way, then, We Insist is actually the quintessential Africana studies text. I use Africana studies deliberately. John Henrik Clarke explained his preference for the term. He wrote, quote, "I prefer to use the phrase Africana studies to Black studies. Black or Blackness tells you how you look without telling you who you are, whereas Africa or Africana relates you to land, history, culture," end of quote. According to Africana studies scholar James Conyers, quote, "Africana studies could serve the scholarly world in twofold ways, in a twofold manner, providing theory and praxis in solving problems in the African-American community and presenting an alternative epistemology in the arts and social sciences for the examination of African phenomena." I believe the We Insist album achieves both goals in Conyers' mandate, particularly the second goal. The continual need for an alternative epistemology cannot be overemphasized. This is why our departments and fields of Black studies, Africana studies, African American studies remain critical for providing students with another set of stories, theories, concepts, and lenses. So I want to start with thinking about how the album helps us to process the theme of revolution and liberation. In 1958, before composing We Insist, Max Roach and bass player Oscar Pettiford joined saxophonist Sonny Rollins on his 19-minute-long Freedom Suite. The composition is stark with only saxophone, bass, and drums. There is a central, almost playful melodic theme that frames at the beginning and at the end, the frantic changes in tempo, and the urgent improvisation of Rollins and Roach. If the music did not convey his intent, Rollins explains the inspiration in his liner notes. He says, quote, "America is deeply rooted in Negro culture, its colloquialisms, its humor, its music. How ironic that the Negro, who more than any other people can claim America's culture as his own, is being persecuted and repressed, that the Negro who has exemplified the humanities in his very existence is being rewarded with inhumanity," end of quote. So those were the liner notes. So let's take a quick listen to Sonny Rollins' Freedom Suite. All right. So again, there is a central, almost playful melodic theme that frames at the beginning. So what you heard at the beginning also comes back at the end. And in between, there are frantic changes in tempo and some urgency in what we hear from Rollins and Roach. And I'll just read again a little piece of his liner notes. This is Sonny Rollins. He says, "America is deeply rooted in Negro culture. How ironic that the Negro, who more than any other people can claim America's culture as his own, is being persecuted and repressed." Producer and part owner of Riverside Records, where the album came out, Orrin Keepnews, who was not Black, renamed the piece and wrote a different explanation for the liner notes. He wrote, quote, "This suite then is about Sonny Rollins. More precisely, it is about freedom as Sonny is equipped to perceive it. He is a creative artist living in New York City in the 1950s. He is a jazz musician who, partly by absorbing elements of Bird and Monk and many others, has evolved his own personal music. He is a Negro. Thus, the meaning of freedom to Rollins is compounded of all this, and undoubtedly much more. In one sense, then, the reference is to the musical freedom of this unusual combination of composition and improvisation. In another, it is to physical and moral freedom, to the presence and absence of it in Sonny's own life and in the way of life for other Americans to whom he feels a relationship," end of quote. So those are the liner notes that the producer and part owner replaced Sonny's with. For me, it is a very ambiguous and equivocal explanation that lays no responsibility on the oppressors, but instead turns the spotlight back on the oppressed, as if what Rollins is dealing with here is all in his head. There is no such ambiguity in We Insist. In 1958, the same year as Rollins' album, perhaps musing on what he learned in that collaboration, Max Roach was featured on the cover of Downbeat magazine. In the interview, he said, quote, "I hope to write some things that mean something, some larger works than those I've already done," end of quote. Even though the We Insist album was released in 1960, it conceptually frames time almost 4 centuries and space, beginning with slavery in 1619 and ending in Johannesburg, South Africa in the 1990s. Acknowledging the unbreakable connections between Africans in Africa and Africans in America, Roach explained, quote, I think that Black music is really African-American music, end of quote. Each of the 5 tracks on the album reflects a different aspect of the notion of liberation. So let's take a journey through the album and consider what Max Roach did with it. And don't forget, I've called this the quintessential Africana studies text. The first track is called Driver Man. It captures slavery in its most brutal and complicated ways. It begins with percussion and voice, a call and response between Max and Abby Lincoln that has the organic percussive rhythm of West Africa and is reprised throughout the track. But sometimes, if you shut your eyes, you can also hear that steady beat as the strokes of labor as slaves worked on the plantation and as they sang work songs as they worked. When the other instruments join, saxophonist Coleman Hawkins takes over with a heart-wrenching solo that squeaks momentarily in its intense interpretation of the subject. In the liner notes, Nat Hentoff explained that Hawkins refused to redo that part. Quote, "No, don't splice," said Hawkins. "When it's all perfect, especially on a piece like this, there's something very wrong," end of quote. Towards the end of the song, Abby Lincoln comes back and repeats the stark lines of violence, rape, sexual assault, harsh brutality. So you're going to hear that in this, as I play this piece.
Driver man, he made a life, but the mammy ain't his wife. Chopping cotton, don't be slow. Better finish out your row. Keep a moving with that plow. Driver man'll show you how. Get to work and root that stump. Driver man'll make you jump. Better make your hammer ring. Driver man'll start to swing. Ain't but 2 things on my mind. Driver man and quitting time.
Let's see, where were we? There we go. So you heard the lyrics. Driver man, he made a life, but the mammy ain't his wife. Chopping cotton, don't be slow. Better finish off your row. Keep it moving with that plow. Driver man will show you how. And it goes on and on about what would happen if you don't keep working. As if to remind us that Black life continues on in America with Du Bois's notion of double consciousness. Roach on drums finishes with James Schenck on bass, a fitting oral representation using percussion and string. The second track is called Freedom Day. Remember I said there are 5, so this is our second one. So we start with slavery. But now in this track, this track reflects the irony of Emancipation Day. It's called Freedom Day. The hope and anxiety that came with freedom. Quote, everybody that I see says it's really true, we're free, end of quote. Juneteenth was June 19th, 1865. It was a moment. Hentoff explains Freedom Day like this. Quote, it communicates the vibrant expectancy and wonderment and nagging disbelief in the period immediately following the Emancipation Proclamation. In her book about migration, Warmth of Other Suns, Isabel Wilkerson describes the confusion of the moment for the people who celebrated June 19th, 1865. Quote, this was the day Union soldiers rode into Galveston, announced that the Civil War was over, and freed 250,000 slaves in Texas, who, not knowing they were free, had toiled for 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. There was a mixture of jubilation and disbelief captured in the lyrics written by Oscar Brown Jr. and sung by Abbey Lincoln on the track Freedom Day. So I'm going to play a little piece of Freedom Day.
Whisper, listen, whisper, say we're free. Rumors flying, must be lying, can it really be? Can't conceive it, can't believe it, but that's what they say. Slave no longer, this is Freedom Day. Freedom Day, it's Freedom Day. Throw those shackling chains away. Everybody that I see says it's really true, we're free.
All right. As the track continues, free jazz improvisation, which is the new turn in that era, takes over, depicting jubilance or jubilation and confusion. In the end, Jim Crow takes over, and there are no 40 acres and no mule. The most poignant and striking piece on the album is called Triptych. If the 4 other tracks tell the story of the history of Black experiences, this 3rd track tells the story of the internal psyche and trauma that these peoples have endured. In his book, In the Break, Fred Moten describes this break, this important juncture on this album. He says, quote, Lincoln hums and then screams over Roach's increasingly and insistently intense percussion, moving inexorably in a trajectory and towards a location that is remote from, if not in excess or inaccessible to words, end of quote. So I'm going to come back to Triptych in a minute. It sits well in the middle of the album, but also seeps through powerfully from the first track to the last and beyond. So let me just quickly jump to number 4 and number 5. I'll come back here. Max Roach's foray into Africa on the last 2 tracks qualifies this album further as an Africana studies text because it connects the story in the Americas to the story of Africa. It reminds us that oppression and power of white supremacy has manifested in different parts of the Black world. All Africa, his 4th track, captures the story of independence and sovereignty across the continent of Africa. After the continent was divided by Europe at the Berlin Conference in 1884, the different regions spent decades working to reclaim their independence. Some of these movements yielded bloody wars and others were won by diplomacy. From the 1950s to the 1990s, African countries triumphed, throwing off the shackles of colonialism, but embroiled in the continual struggle to decipher their own identities after the long encounters with the oppressor and their European trappings, such as language and educational systems. For this track, All Africa, Nigerian drummer Babatunde Olatunji accompanies Abby Lincoln on a polyrhythmic conga drums as she calls out 36 ethnic groups. He responds with Yoruba proverbs and other ethnic exclamations. It is significant that Lincoln starts with Bantu, which is a language subgroup in Sub-Saharan Africa, spoken by over 85 million people, originating on the Cameroon and Nigeria border. The fifth track, but I recommend it. I hope I've described it enough so you understand that it's steeped in Africa. We know that the last bastions of colonial European dominance in Africa were in Zimbabwe and South Africa. Tears for Johannesburg, the last track, deals with the horrors of apartheid, which was in full force, even as civil rights and Black Power leaders were insisting on the dismantling of Jim Crow laws in the US. As Abby Lincoln begins with cries and wordless calls for justice, freedom, and as Olatunji and Roach join her, we are reminded of the harsh history of apartheid. In his autobiography, The Beat of My Drum, Babatunde Olatunji reflects on the relevance of this album and his participation on it. Calling it an anti-segregationist album, Olatunji explains that because of the album, quote, Max did not get that much support from club owners in those days. He was someone who went about his work and stuck to it, to what he believed in, end of quote. Indeed, Ingrid Monson asserts that a close look at this album reveals the interplay between the social, the political, and the musical, which reminds us that jazz tradition has always been in dialogue with the social and cultural movements going on around it, and has often been at its most inspired when engaged in social commentary, end of quote. But I am contending that We Insist offers us more to think about. Too often we end our deliberations of Black experiences at the macro level, the society or the community. We rarely go to the level of intimate relationships between the people who make up the movement. So now I'm moving back to the third track. In 1957, 3 years before We Insist, Abby Lincoln released the album That's Him. On it was the song Strong Man, which Oscar Brown Jr. wrote to capture her love of Roach. Ingrid Monson explains, quote, Brown met Abby Lincoln when she was performing at the Black Orchid in Chicago in 1957. At her request, he wrote the song Strong Man for her then boyfriend, Max Roach, end of quote. Strong Man is a tender song about this wonderful Black man. What a hardworking hero he is. He's got dark and shining arms, crisp curly hair, lips are warm and full. I mean, this is a really beautiful man. And so I'm going to play you a little piece of that song for you. So this is before she did the project.
In love with a guy who is everything grand. Any man can be. I'm in love with a strong man. What a hard-working hero is he. Great big arms, muscled, hard, dark, and shining, he folds.
All right, so she's in love. Again, she had this song written specifically for Max Roach. Since Oscar Brown wrote this for Lincoln about Max, we might understand the extent to which she threw herself in the We Insist project 3 years later. Most critics agree that Abby Lincoln brought an urgency to the album, particularly in this piece, that set it apart from the rest of the jazz albums of that time, making it very different even from Sonny Rollins' Freedom Suite. So I'm going to play a little piece of triptych. This is perhaps the most important piece on the whole album. I'm going to play a little piece of, it's called Triptych, Prayer, Protest, and Peace. I'll play a little piece of each. So here's prayer. So that's prayer. You can hear it's just sort of moaning, humming, and what Max does behind her is also very meditative. Now we move to protest. And then at the end, it comes, so that goes on for about a minute plus, and then we come to the end, which is now peace. All right. In Triptych, Abby Lincoln vocalizes the deep, painful experience of being a Black woman. The song is divided into those three parts. When I listen to this, prayer, protest, and peace, I am transported to the belly of the slave ship, the earnest reach for a spiritual power that will lead us out, the deep moans and screams of anger and distress, and the yearning for peace. But I understand this personally, too, because I am moved to prayer, protest, and peace every time I or my children or my husband encounter racism or sexism, the results of slavery, colonialism, and imperialism, including those two stories I told at the beginning of this talk about my daughters. Fred Moten likens the sound of Lincoln in protest, that middle part, to the beating of Frederick Douglass's Aunt Hester. Of protest, Moten says, the revolution embedded in such duration is for a moment a run of questions. As we listen to her screaming, we're thinking, what is the edge of this event? What am I, the object? What is the music? What is manhood? What is the feminine? What is the beautiful? What is Blackness? What will Blackness be? End of quote. All this is conveyed in that protest section. And so I know that my time is running out, so I'm just going to jump now to my end, towards the end. I'm contending here that there is more to it than meets the eye, that the marriage between Abby Lincoln and Max Roach created an opportunity for her to throw herself into that project to the extent that she actually allegedly damaged her voice after screaming like that in that song. I don't know if there's any other track that anyone here can point to that does what Abby Lincoln does in that particular track. It's very urgent, very effective, but what did this do to her voice? And in many interviews, she wrote about how she really threw herself into it. She didn't want to do it, but Max Roach said that she should, so she did. And so this raises lots of questions about what happens in relationships and love, and how we never get to think about that with regard to Black people. So it's just very complex. In conclusion, Africana texts wrestle from racists, historians, and commentators the platform, the framing, and the stories. As we come back to the concept of darkness, we can see how We Insist exemplifies the two avenues that Black music can offer us: a chance to illuminate social justice and an opportunity to dig deeper under layers of sound in ways that reveal truths about Black culture, Black stories, Black history, the Black world. but we need to really lean in. In the British classic Heart of Darkness, Joseph Conrad's character, Marlowe, explains racism, colonialism, and imperialism. He says, quote, "They grabbed what they could for the sake of what could be got. It was just robbery with violence, aggravated murder on a large scale, the conquest of the earth, which mostly means the taking it away from those who have a different complexion or slightly flatter noses than ours. It's not a pretty thing when you look into it too much," end of quote. So as I wrap up here, I just want to read this last paragraph. I hope I've convinced you that We Insist inspires us to widen our view of the history of Black people. It inspires us to remember the expanse of our boundaries and our connections across them. When Aretha Franklin sings Bridge Over Troubled Water, when we hear the gospel in her voice and in the response from the organs, we should ask whether her troubled waters were the same as Paul Simon's. It's the same song, but different stories. If we know Aretha and her journey, we know that her life and work were linked to the civil rights movement and to Black women's empowerment. We also know that she struggled in love. After we listen actively to Aretha's version of Bridge Over Troubled Waters, or to the voices of people like Mavis Staples, Aretha Franklin, Donnie McClurkin, Johnny Gill. I mean, I have a long list of people that I think exemplify that sort of, that rich voice that we should be examining. And after we listen to albums like We Insist, we can't say we don't know. Perhaps we can all do a better job of it, anticipating the waves of those troubled waters, pushing them back, and collectively working to build a bridge that will save us all. Thank you. That's it.
Wow. Thank you so much for moving presentation. We now have about 20-ish minutes for some Q&A. If you have a question, we ask you to please type it into the chat box, and myself and the other moderators will keep track of questions and we'll take care to read them. We kindly ask you not to turn on your microphone and just start talking, but if any question sparks lively debate or requires a follow-up question or comment, we'll then instruct you to turn your mic on and speak up. So we welcome any questions. David Heiss has his hand raised. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, thank you, and I'll be quick because I have a class to teach in a few minutes. But thank you very much for your talk. As a resident of Missouri at Lincoln University, I'm familiar, and I will probably send you a note later. But that bumper sticker, I don't know how truly deep much of our audience here today that sticker is, not just of that particular truck driver, but of the attitude in Missouri throughout the greater American South. I remember being at playing in a concert nearby, just a little bit northwest of Columbia here in Missouri. And we played the national anthem, the Star Spangled Banner, and then we played Dixie. The audience sat for the national anthem and they stood for Dixie.
Wow.
That is the kind of both latent and explicit kind of attitudes that so many people have. And I know, we have many smart people here, many with a better worldview than me, but what you described is very real. I'm sorry that your daughter had to see that, but it's not uncommon. Right. It happens all the time, and certainly not everybody, but it is. Anyway, I do have to go. Thank you so much for your wonderful talk. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Enjoy Missouri.
While we're waiting for the next question to come in, I had a question. You did a wonderful job of bringing up the complexities of and the ramifications of the word dark, wherever it may be used. And bringing this back to timbre and orchestration, I would love to hear any thoughts you might have anytime that's used as a word to describe someone's timbre, the sound of a cymbal, or anything like that. And then,
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much, Jason. That's the question that I think is at the very center of what I'm trying to do here with dark. Of course, I spent most of my time in this presentation just talking about one example of I think an album that really helps us to stop being lazy about the use of the term. That's really what I'm doing here is I'm trying to say that we all use that term. You know, I use it too. You know, I although as I've been thinking about it more and more, I've been shifting. You know, I think in this era where we are trying to become more responsive and attentive to what people want to be called, you know, pronouns and names in particular. I think that I would offer dark as one way, as another word to rethink, you know. And so as I've been thinking about it, when we turn our attention to how dark is used in describing music, this is one of the only places where darkness is good. You know, like when we think about the tones of a saxophone, you know, of a tenor sax as dark and rich. When we think of, again, as I said, I have a long list of vocalists who I think have that particular, there's a particular texture to their timbre that not everybody has it, but when we hear it, we know it's beautiful. You know, I think those of us who are attuned to popular music or African-American music, gospel, will hear that voice. Sometimes we'll call that quality soulful. So people on my short list, again, folks like Mavis Staples, Phyllis Hyman, Layla Hathaway, CeCe Winans, Gerald Levert, Louis Armstrong. There's and I'm still trying to figure out how to describe it, and I would be happy to hear what you all think. It's a tone that is distinct, that is, you know, not like Anita Baker has that tone. If we're thinking of the three people in Destiny's Child, we know it's not Michelle. If you know your Destiny's Child, it might be Kelly Rowland that has that particular texture. And when we hear it, we think of it as beautiful. And if we think of it as beautiful, then can we turn the way we think about darkness more generally? Danielle is here. Yay, Danielle.
Hi, Dr. Shonekan. I am so sorry. I am going to be really quick because I have a class that I have to teach at 3, but I could not miss this lecture because you know me, I'm the timbre girl.
I know.
So yeah, I'm the timbre girl. So I think one of my questions and the response to what you're talking about is thinking about Black music history or African music history from like a timbral perspective. I think it's useful to go back and you look at the archives and you see how people were reviewing our performances. But I find that a lot of scholars, they come and talk to me about this and they're like, well, you know, it's just the adjectives that people are using to actually qualify the sound, but it's not, and that's like the main part. That's how you get to the story, right. You know? So right. I would just be curious about what you think. Maybe we could be more in conversation about at the heart of our understanding about Black timbres or African timbres and how they relate to our history musically. Mm-hmm. How do we even begin having those discussions if people are already kind of negating the very words and that we use to describe the sounds?
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Danielle. I'm so glad that you're here, and we should absolutely be in conversation. This is something that I've been thinking a lot about, particularly as we think about DEI and ways of getting through our organizations and our classes, our institutions. This is definitely something I've been thinking about, and I've actually been, I wrote a note to myself at SEM that I need to send you an email and start a conversation with you about what you're finding, and maybe we could even do a panel at SEM. Yes, so people, every time I mention this to like colleagues and friends, you know, they're like, it's just a word, you know, it's no big deal, you know, that's, words can't harm you, but words are powerful, you know, and like I said, with the little sticker I mentioned, just 2 words, but those words have implications that run deep and run all the way back to the 1600s. The same with the ways in which Black music, Black artists, Black voices, Black sound has been described over the years. And so it starts there. Of course, I focus mostly on popular contemporary music, which is a wonderful like snapshot, but you know, as ethnomusicologists, we do need to dig deeper and pull that thread all the way from early reviews of like Bessie Smith or Ma Rainey, you know, and pull out what words and connotations were used to describe those sounds, which in our ears, in terms of the aesthetics, are beautiful, but which in those reviews and receptions were derogatory. And so, yeah, that's absolutely a great assignment, Danielle. I'm going to reach out to you very soon to carry on that conversation.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
We have 2 hands raised, so we'll go to Emily first and then Joshua after.
Hi, Emily Dolan here. What a wonderful talk. That was, I thought one could be filled up after AMS, SEM with talks, but it's great. Another talk is fantastic. I wanted to ask a question sort of following up on Danielle Davis's really important points that she was making, which, you know, your talk, of course, made me think of Nina Eidsheim's work on sonic blackness, and then some of her arguments in the race of sound, where she's really putting timbre into the agency around timbre to the listener, and so that darkness or all the other qualities that get brought up when people talk about Black voices, it's something that belongs to the listener. And I'm really getting the sense from your project this is kind of a reclaiming of, or potentially can reclaim some of that language. At least within the realm of music, that it's not just something that's being imposed from without. I'm just curious how you position some of some of this maybe in relation to some of the work that Nina's doing.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you, Emily. Yeah, I mean, I think in the ways in which we reclaim stuff, that is certainly something that I'm thinking about. And I also, I don't know, I'm using this to kind of to push back, you know, it's like the ways in which the B word is used or the N word is used. And I know we are you know, that's a divisive conversation there as well. There is absolutely nothing I can do about the color of my skin, although I know that there are people, some of my peers in places like Nigeria and Ghana and Jamaica and Trinidad and Cameroon that are bleaching their skin to get away from this darkness, right? But most of us are not doing that. And that's because we are seeing the beauty in our darkness. And what I'm trying to do is get us to be more responsive to that, this notion of beauty, this notion of darkness being great, and have music take us there, right? So I'm just, it's different from what Nina is doing. It's a different project, I think, than that. Because I've spent so much of my administrative career thinking about inclusion and diversity and trying to come up with new ways, because everything that we do is so stale. You know, we add a few Black people to our campuses and we think that we're done. We do one mentoring program and we think we're done. And I'm trying to get a little bit deeper into it through the use of thinking about music, sound, and the concept of darkness. So it's still very conceptual, but it's certainly connected to the kind of work that I do as a faculty member, as a mother, and as a citizen, I think, too. Thanks. Joshua?
Joshua, and then
Yes, thank you so much for your talk and all of your ideas. I'm really struck by how when dark is used, the comment that you made at the beginning, when dark is used negatively, it often refers to the visual domain, but the positive connotations of dark are auditory and gustatory. You said dark chocolate and music. Yeah. I guess I'm really curious about sort of the different ways that dark can come across. It's the same word, but it's describing some very different things, because it doesn't seem as though the vocalists that you've mentioned have there's not a visual component to the sound that we're recognizing. Mm-hmm. It's something different. Mm-hmm. However, when Abby Lincoln describes Max Roach as dark and shiny, she's reclaiming that word. And so I just was hoping that you could unpack a little bit this notion between reclaiming the visual domain versus celebrating dark in the auditory, gustatory. Mm-hmm. Because it seems like they're two very different things at play here. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, you all are making me really think about this. This is exactly, I think, what this series of talks are about. It's about kind of thinking through these tricky concepts. So thank you. I think what I'm trying to say, Joshua, is that they should be, and again, when we're talking about dark, we're talking about dark in the English language. Other languages have different ways of describing darkness that are not as connected to the systemic societal view of Black people in this same way, right? So we're, again, specific to the English language. I think what I'm trying to argue is that if we can take what our notions of darkness with chocolate, although dark chocolate is bitter as well, right? So, you know, but it's good. If we can take notions of darkness as it relates to taste and to the visual, and interrupt it with new revelations from the sonic, you know, that we are then moving in the right direction. It's kind of a trick, you know. I'm trying to figure out a way to get out of racism is what I'm trying to do here. And the dark thing caught me because I watch a lot of baking shows. I watch a lot of cooking shows. Whenever they're doing if it's a challenge where you have to do an evil thing, it's going to be something dark. It's going to be a devil's food cake, you know, and that's going to be literally my skin tone. And so I just started thinking about this, you know, started thinking, and I kind of, I get a little bit of a shiver every time it's used. But then every time we listen to Aretha Franklin, you know, we just love the quality of that voice. And that voice is sometimes described in ways that, you know, it's layered. It's hard to get through. It's not as kind of wafer thin as some other voices that of people I will not call their names right now. There's a quality. And so I started thinking, what if we could rethink how we see it or think about it visually, and instead use the sonic, what we know of the sonic attraction to those soulful voices as a way to, another way. You know, there are lots of ways to get out of racism, but that might be a way that music offers us. First of all, of course, if we listen to the lyrics, and to this album, we're getting educated, we're raising our awareness. That's great. But then if we also lean into Abby Lincoln's voice, you know, when she really, even not just from Triptych, from the other parts of that album. And after that album, her voice gets even more granular, more because of what she did in Triptych. Her voice changes and it gets even deeper and in some ways more beautiful. That the music can also do that for us, that we can redefine our paradigms on darkness. Again, work in progress. Thank you, Joshua. Great question. I'm still thinking. Zach?
Thank you so much, Dr. Shonekan, for this generous and really rich talk. I'm wondering if you could help me sort of understand something a little bit better that I've been struggling with in this talk that actually comes directly out of Joshua's question. And that is, I'm wondering, I mean, you were saying in this last remark that that you're sort of speaking specific to the American and English context of connotations of the word dark. But part of me wonders if as a diurnal species in a very ocular-centric sort of context here, if we're at a fundamental disadvantage or handicapped in trying to combat these sorts of connotations. I mean, it strikes me that this might be a kind of semantic accident, you know, as diurnal species, where the nighttime has for a very long time been associated with the unknown and with danger, right? That these concepts can be mapped onto a realm that has nothing to do, again, sort of accidentally related to the notion of darkness. And I'm wondering if you can help sort of think about how to fight this when it might be something sort of intrinsic that actually is more than just the American English context. I mean, in cultures around the world, darkness is associated with bad things, which has been sort of accidentally, again, cross-mapped or semiotically projected onto darkness of skin tone and other domains. I'm not being very articulate right now, but I'm wondering if you can kind of help, because it just sort of seems that we're at this real disadvantage in combating this really nefarious idea.
Yes, Zach. We're at a disadvantage anyway, right? That this history is so globally skewed against dark-skinned people, no matter where they are. That we're never. It feels like we're never going to win. We're never going to get out. You know, you hear folks say, "Oh, she's beautiful for a dark-skinned girl." You know, like it's everywhere. It's all over the place. But you know, we don't do the same with whiteness. You know, like I'm trying to think, and I've noted in the past the ways in which we think about paleness with illness, you know, that type of thing. It doesn't seem to hold on to an entire demographic of people in the same way, right? And this is so deep that because I grew up in West Africa, again, where people are, I've had friends who have bleached their skin. This is deeply psychological. We are partaking of it as well. And so, yeah, dark connected with Black people or dark-skinned people is problematic and unfortunate, but the whole thing is problematic and unfortunate. And what we have to do is just try to figure out new ways of getting out, like what are some new ways of thinking about this, because the old ways haven't helped us. Okay, so there's a lecture on white privilege. Let's do that lecture. We go to the lecture and then we leave and we're done. Let's talk about microaggressions. All that is important, but we haven't really moved forward. What struck me about George Floyd and what happened after George Floyd is that we were all attentive because we were all in quarantine and we were all at home, right? If that had happened on a regular working week cycle, it would have come and gone the way Trayvon did, the way Mike Brown did, the way Breonna Taylor did, the way all the others did. So what we learned about George Floyd was that we actually paused and really were concentrated on a particular thing at a particular time as a global society. I think that's what is called for in any kind of change. So what I'm saying here is that perhaps, that we could actually think about this word that we all use all the time, and these concepts of the dark night and dark waters, right? And, just, I don't know, dark meat is kind of yummy, but again, that's taste, right? That maybe that kind of effort will push us forward a little bit. So I'm kind of trying to work to the answer, it's like, here's the answer, how can I get there, and I'm working on it. And these questions are really helping me. Thank you.
We have time for one more question. So Jay, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much. This was great. I really enjoyed it, and I'm studying or trying to study voice timbre, and one thing that has been really interesting for me to try and think about and untangle is what happens to brown girls, especially who go into opera. And this is something I've experienced personally, where people can't seem to separate my vocal timbre from my appearance. And although I have all these high notes, I'm constantly told, you sound like a mezzo, or you have that blackness in your voice. And I'm just like, what does that even mean? And then if you look at the great Zwischenfachs, Shirley Verrett, it's all Grace Bumbry, it's all Black women who, why does this happen? And then also, why do we always write mezzo roles as, characters like Carmen and Ursula and the voodoo witches, and they're always a little bit malevolent, manipulative, and it's associated with the dark color of a mezzo or alto voice. And I'm just wondering, if you have any sort of comments on that, or any advice for, how I can start to work on this in a more, I don't know, structured, organized way, I guess.
That is so interesting, Jay. So interesting. So my dissertation was many years ago, was on this African-American singer, opera singer, soprano, Her name was Camilla Williams, and she was the first Black woman to sing for the New York City Opera. So the first Black woman to sign a major contract with a major opera company. And what's significant about Camilla is that she, her first major role was Madame Butterfly. But if you listen to Camilla's voice, I never call her name when I'm talking about sort of rich soprano voices that inch towards mezzo, because her voice is really, again, I'm going to use terrible words, you know, it's really pretty, you know, like it doesn't have that kind of depth that we speak of when we're talking about these other roles. What I'll say also is, or these other artists, like in the pop realm, in the R&B soul realm, Nina Simone has that kind of voice I'm thinking about. What I'll say is that opera is very much a Western form, and therefore they're going to immediately connect darkness to these kinds to Blackness, and so I could see how that would happen. However, a voice like Jesse Norman, I think, has a voice that's very different from Camilla. Jesse Norman's voice is, oh gosh, it's so full, so robust, right? I would say that voice, Jesse Norman's voice, would be beautiful when we think of it through the Black aesthetic. It is just magnificent. Loved Camilla of blessed memory. She passed on a few years ago, and I worked with her for a long time. Love her, but her voice didn't have that same quality. So she could do a Madame Butterfly, you know, and she also did Porgy and Bess, but she never did it on stage. She only did it as a recording. But other Black artists have done Porgy and Bess and bring that essence to it. So, Jay, I have not answered your question, but your question has answered some of mine. You know, it's made me think really about, again, classical versus, or aesthetics of the Western canon versus aesthetics of Black culture, Black sound, Black music. So
yeah, and the way that you know, voice has been discussed in my gospel lessons, my gospel choir, very different from how it's discussed, like voice classification. So we never talked about, you know, soprano, alto, tenor, bass in the same way that we talked about it in the classical world. So it's been quite an experience, kind of swimming in both of these seas, you know. Anyhow, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. All these questions are great. I'm noting them all. Thank you.
Okay, unfortunately, that brings us to the end of our time here today. So I want to first, once again, thank you, Dr. Shonekan, for a deep, rich, important, generous, and just fascinating talk, and the follow-up wonderful, really, I think, it's got a lot of us thinking here. I'd also like to thank the Actor Project for sponsoring our series, the University of Maryland for lending us one of your best today, and all of you for coming out. Hopefully this presentation has inspired you to learn more about timbre, orchestration, Africana studies, and Black American music. If these things interest you, I strongly urge you to join the Sub-Saharan Africa and Diaspora subgroup of the Actor Project. Tour modules and other outputs from this series will eventually be available to both the public and members of Actor. Gotta plug it, don't forget, this is just the beginning of our series. Our next speaker will be Kevin Holt on January 18th of 2023. Keep an eye out for details. We also have many other wonderful talks coming on aspects of neoclassical music in Africa, Afro-Cuban music, hip hop. So we're just getting started, y'all. So once again, thank you, Dr. Shonekan, and we look forward to seeing y'all again soon. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Jason. Bye, everyone.